We're going to talk management for the next few minutes. We're going to hit three big issues, starting with big versus new, or big autos preparing enough for the changing landscape provided by companies like Uber. A couple of HR issues, new employee review guidelines from Goldman and Bridgewater, the way they review folks. And three, seems like nobody is going public these days. What's the deal there and why? Paul Argenti is a business professor at Dartmouth. Jeff Sonnenfeld joins us from Yale, and Bill George joins us from Harvard. We've got the Ivy League covered here. Let's talk first, Suzy, about, I was at a symposium a few months ago where people said that Uber and what it represents, not just to the automobile business, but to the interior of cities, to how people live, how many parking lots we need. It's going to change everything. Is the auto business ready for that? And are cities and the rest of the economy and culture ready for the change that Uber and or self-driving cars could bring?
Well, Uber is one of those companies, like so many companies now, that just disrupts and disrupts and disrupts. But isn't that just the story of the economy now? That companies come in and they make gigantic disruptions to our way of life. And the business that we're all in is trying to figure out what is the next industry that's going to be disrupted. I mean, Uber is looking for a world where nobody actually owns a car. And that will change our culture in maybe the same way that having smartphones did.
And Paul, it's not just Uber that's trying to eat their lunch, right? I mean, Tesla's coming up with new cars. There's talk that Apple is going to have a car. So you have new producers, and then you have this potential shift in lifestyle where maybe people just don't have a car. A car is now a service. What do auto CEOs need to do right now to not get cannibalized?
I think the first thing they need to do is get their management house in order in most of the companies, with maybe one exception. I mean, they still have not completely revamped themselves since the financial crisis. So, I mean, they can't even manage themselves properly. They have an enormous amount of problem as a result of the, the issues that are going on with the safety units in the cars exploding, as you know. And so this comes at a really bad time for them. And I think the new competition is something that they're not ready for.
What have they not done management-wise that you would have them do?
One of the biggest problems that they have, in terms of management, I think management is a problem for them, but also it's the talent problem. Because the young, exciting talent that people
isn't
really,
going there.
No, it's going to the new companies. It's going to the companies with the very sharp, growth. And so if you're running an auto company right now, one of your huge problems, and you've got enough of them, is that the really smart engineers that you want are going elsewhere.
Right. They're not going to go work for a company that has problems and is in Detroit,
Jeff Sonnenfeld, how do you see it? I mean, it seems to me that old line autos in the United States have been focused largely on how do we get to the electric powered car. But really what we're talking about here is how do we get to a world where there may not be as many cars?
You're right.
I think the millennials are changing everything. They don't want cars. They want to live in the city. They don't want to live out in the suburbs, the exurbs. It's really changing things dramatically.
Right.
And if you can call for an Uber, why have a car? And I think the mentality is driving this. And thus it has always been that the new companies like Tesla and Uber are going to change things. I've met with both Elon Musk and Travis Kalanick. Both of these leaders have tremendous systems mentalities, and they're totally redesigning systems. And I remember hearing the chief designer for one of the largest German companies, whose name you would recognize, be very dismissive. Say, oh, those guys don't know what they're talking about. I think they're very foolish because they're going to change the whole landscape. You saw that Chevrolet didn't exactly burn them up with the Volt. They've got a lot of burdens, a lot of legacy costs right now. And I think you'll see with the self-driving cars, total change in transportation pattern. Older people that can't get out now will be able to go. They'll just call an Uber, self-driving, they'll pick them up, and they'll be able to go. I actually would like to see some kind of merger with either Google or Apple and Tesla to bring them together, some kind of partnership. I think it's accelerated.
Suzy and Bill are both Harvard guys. That's what we don't know, is they conspiring here. So it's but Paul is an old friend, so Paul will have to double team against them. But I think we're making a mistake here on the panel so far, a little mistake, about using broad brushstroke of all U.S. automakers versus non. First of all, the one U.S. automaker who's missing the mark here is the one that's actually not owned by the U.S. It's Fiat Chrysler. They're the ones that are talking in ways that are minimizing this, where Sergio Marchionne saying we have to worry about the here and now, forget all these future modes of transportation. A very narrow, very, very short-term view. By contrast, Ford is, Paul, 40% of their management team is new and from the outside. It's incredible. variety in there. People from Silicon Valley working in the most senior levels, as well as from Wall Street in strategic roles. It's quite exciting. And Mark Fields has built up a giant base in Silicon Valley. He is just on, yesterday at this same code conference talking about how they see in about 5 years, about 40% of their vehicles will be electronic. But in terms of the self-driving cars, he also talked through the mathematics and legal issues, which are quite fascinating, that it's going to be easily mapped urban routes, that so much driving actually won't happen. And that'll be within a 15-year time frame. So there are some automakers really on top of this, and Ford especially so.
I want to pivot to energy. We've been talking a little bit about oil, but Bill George, I want to start with you because you're on the board, or recently were. I assume you still are on the board of ExxonMobil. Is that correct? Do you think
up to a year ago,
the large energy companies are doing enough to get ready for intensified regulation having to do with climate change, not just in the United States potentially, but around the world?
Well, clearly they're trying to cut their CO2 usage, trying to cut their carbon footprint. But there's a lot of people just want to get rid of fossil fuels altogether. That's not going to happen. By 2050, renewable sources still only account for less than 25% of the total. The real issue is the tremendous growth in Asia and India and China. I think you've seen Exxon recently invest in carbon sequestration technology, which could be very beneficial, and in a company called Fuel Cell. They've been dabbling at it. I know that Exxon in particular does not feel that they have the expertise in wind and solar, and they feel the economics aren't there yet.
So
maybe they will be someday.
The Paris Accords do a lot, right? And it's going to affect a lot of industries. Are they ready? Is that what you see?
You know, they've got a huge number of the people working for them right now focused on this. So you wonder about the productivity of these companies overall because you've got everybody looking at compliance. But the job of the leader is to put the company where the future is going, and that they'll succeed or fail on whether or not they're looking to where the future is.
Can I push back? I mean, is it part? And Jeff, weigh in here if you want. Is part of it though? I mean, if you think that ultimately, you're still going to be using some kind of carbon production for your energy is part of the leadership role to push back and say, look, all this concern is important and lovely, et cetera, but the way we drive our cars is the following. And that, unless there's dramatic technological change, which hasn't arrived yet because none of these things are actually producing that much kilowatts per hour, to say, look, we really have to focus on what we do as our core.
Yeah, I mean,
is there any role for pushback on that?
You have 2 billion people who have no access at all to anything other than fossil fuel, right? And in the world who are, in great need of that for years and years to come. So I could see pushback, at least in the short term. But in the long term, I do think there is interest in social change around fossil fuels. But the growth curve for energy companies looks like this. It's pretty hard to not want to stay in that business as long as you possibly can and milk it for everything you got.
The sourcing issues are interesting, too. We've just seen moments ago OPEC, unable to reach any major price hikes, which is, good news, I think, for many industrial nations around the world. But we also have seen an incredible change just in the last 5 years. If we had this panel discussion 5 years ago, we'd be wringing our hands more. The U.S. has gone from basically zero in oil shale production right now to we're up so dramatically. We're probably the 5th or 6th largest oil source, and that is a huge change. To your point, Michelle, I think that is something to celebrate. But we also see that when it comes to the biggest use of oil is for transportation fuel, and that's where your question in the earlier part of this panel about electronic vehicles really matters so much. China's the big market, but they've quadrupled in their interest in electronic vehicles, and it's up an amazing 60% even here in the U.S. over last year.
Yeah, well, electronic vehicles means more
Jeff,
coal production at this point.
Bill George,
I want to switch topics because we're running out of time.
Shale gas is kind of an interim step. It cuts the carbon footprint by 50%. So that will be an interim step for the next 25 to 50 years. And China's the one that's really got to get their act together because the emissions over there are just creating a horrible environmental situation. They're trying, they're moving, but it's way late.
Bill, if we could go on to another topic, the 360 feedback model at Goldman Sachs and Bridgewater, where you're getting feedback all the time. Is this a good idea?
Bill's on the board at Goldman, too.
Absolutely. I think you should. At Medtronic, I always give people feedback all the time in real time. Why wait till the end of the year and save it up as though you're going to nail them 360 feedback is a very, very good tool. You don't really know how you're doing until you know how the people working for you and the peers that work with you every day feel about you.
So Suzy, you're shaking your head.
Improving our leaders' emotional intelligence. Somebody like Goldman Sachs has no problem hiring the best and the brightest people anywhere, but we have to ensure that every one of them has a high level of self-awareness, high level of EQ, and you only get that through feedback. It's something we teach in the classroom every day here at HBS, and we'll continue to beef that up because that's the key to leadership.
Dartmouth is chuckling. Suzy is shaking her head.
I halfway agree with Bill, and that you got to be giving feedback all the time. Okay, that is what you do if you're a good manager. You do it real time. You have a meeting. Michelle, this is how I feel about how you were in that meeting. But 360 feedback. Anybody who's ever been through it will tell you it works once or maybe twice, because after that, people start gaming the system, right? You say something nice about me, I'll say something nice about you. The first time you get 360 feedback, it's shocking because you're hearing for the first time what people around you really feel. And so it is very effective the first time. But to rely on it more than one or two times, anybody who goes through it, it's a game.
What about Bridgewater? And Bridgewater does this thing where it feels to me like a rather brutal culture.
It's like
it's a big problem. There are private discussions at Bridgewater that some seniors have that are not transmitted. I've been in there. I have to sign away my firstborn if I say more about it. But and not everything is up for grabs. There are certain things that aren't transmitted, and that fairness is an issue. You have issues of privacy. You have issues of mediocrity, as Suzy, I'm sure, and Bill, Paul, you may agree that many times you have group norms that are reinforcing people that are not rate busters. A maverick gets destroyed in a 360 process.
Right.
Yeah. It's good to have the feedback, but maybe sometimes the world is crazy and you're the right one. Maybe profound change is going to upset some people. So disruptors don't get good 360 feedback. If you want no disruptors, let's drown the world with 360.
Yeah, I think there's two things going on there. They're not getting, they've always had 360 feedback once a year at Goldman, as far as I know. And they're adding this constant feedback loop because they're having trouble attracting millennials. I mean,
do millennials like this?
Absolutely.
They want
more of it. They want candor.
They can't get enough.
I get the impression they don't want to be criticized.
Well, some do. But a good one. The good ones.
Good feedback.
They want
the good feedback.
They want the trophy.
They want honesty, though. I think that's what millennials want. They want somebody to be straight with them. And they think the reason why they're fleeing corporate settings is because they're not getting honest feedback. They're not getting candor. And you've got to have a culture that has truth and trust in it to have any kind of feedback be effective.
All right.
Feedback's meaningless otherwise.
We're gonna switch to another topic, but meantime, we want to thank Bill George for being with us. Bill has to leave, so I guess that means you're going to have to carry Harvard forward here, based on your history. But that's okay.
Can we talk about Bill now that he's gone?
Can we talk about Bill? so let's. Go ahead. A quick thought there, Jeff. Then I want to turn to the question of why fewer companies are going public, or why many are waiting longer to do so. Jeff.
Well, let's just go. That's a great question. You know, years ago, in fact, last few years, when I would go off to the private equity forums where you have a private equity firm that would bring their portfolio companies there, they would talk like they're Prometheus chained. Let me free. I want to be unleashed. And now when I go in there, they say, don't throw us out there. The CEOs of those portfolio companies, universally, they're saying the regulatory environment, the uncertainty of these IPOs, the IPOs are down 2 to 10% in recent years. It hasn't been looking so good. Overall, that there is we're down dramatically, down 60% in IPOs this year over last. That there's a great fear of going out there. They prefer the privacy, the brainstorming with peers, and there are a lot of advantages now, as we see, to not going public.
Yeah, there's pools of money.
Short-termism is a big one too. The activists have scared many into staying private.
Right. There's pools of money sitting around, and you can get it. And so why go public? Why have the discipline of the market staring at you?
And low interest rates, right?
Well,
Saudis need to invest.
Right.
Negative interest rates in a large part of the world.
Right.
You throw in a thing like Uber, trying to get higher growth, right? The reaching for yield and risk in ways that mean that they don't have to go public.
There are a lot of women in Saudi Arabia who can't drive.
I know. It's a very interesting social implications there with Uber, because now they can, get out in a car.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you can get money from a sovereign fund or a teachers in Ontario, and you can remain relatively private, it's a much better way to run a business.
I would. I mean, unless.
Absolutely.
I understand why companies go public.
I don't know. There's a discipline in the public markets that makes you better.
That's
I
right.
think.
I
really believe
that. On that one. The markets make you better. They make you more customer focused. They push you on speed and competition.
But then the counter argument is that it makes you quarterly focused.
Well,
And they
right.
push you in the short term. They push you into the short term.
If you give into the short term, but if you're the kind of leader who says, I'm going to be, strung out by the security, and I mean, that's, you got to be strong to be out there in the markets. And so I think it does separate good leaders from bad.
It brings more visibility. It certainly would have helped Theranos out if they were a public company.
Well, we're going to talk more about Theranos a little bit later on with Suzy as that company goes through its whatever kind of pains it's going through. But let's talk just very quickly, Jeff. I know you had a thought about the untimely passing of Roger and Rico of Pepsi.
I did, but I didn't tell anybody. Roger and Rico was a close friend. I can't believe you read my mind. It's a profound loss. So there's so many people like Morley Safer, who was also a friend. Morley Safer at least got to see age 84 or so, and yet working up to his last minute. Roger and Rico was a very young 71. He actually really brought the first competition between Coke and Pepsi. He was the author of the Pepsi Challenge, and part of the dirty secrets on that is that people slightly preferred Pepsi in the blind taste test. Up till then, Coke had done no comparative testing whatsoever, ever, in other products. People slightly preferred Pepsi. It was an eye-opener, but it was actually Roger who voluntarily pulled the plug, because the dirty secret behind all that is that basically people didn't care which cola it was, so they thought that maybe this is not so good to reveal. But he brought a new sense of marketing, a great sense of energy, creativity, and of course the spin-out of what became Yum Brands was his amazing vision to reverse Wayne Calloway, his predecessor, and to say that was a great strategy to bring Pizza Hut and Taco Bell and all in-house and KFC. But we have channel conflicts. We have an entrepreneurial spirit that's being destroyed in that kind of restaurant business. Let's open things up. And there are so many great things. Dasani came out. It was being developed under his watch, and many great new products and things that were but it also was the kind of a person he was. He's just a very warm, embracing person who'd come into a very tough culture. Under Don Kendall, who's a brilliant visionary, it was one of those toughest places in the country to work, and he led a real transformation in terms of quality of life as well.
All right, Jeff Sonnenfeld, on that note, we will leave it with thanks to you. We appreciate it also to Bill George, and thanks to our panel. We'll see more of you soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.